inclination to technicalize and to depoliticize law. As a society in SA, in South Africa, we have this inclination of thinking that laws are the silver bullets to the problems we face in society. So if you've created a law for something, the assumption is that we've done it, we've solved the problem. And so in my paper, the question I ask is, why do we need a law for protest? Why can't we just do away with it? And that's what I'm puzzling through. That's what the paper is about. We are not just a protest-happy nation, no. Protests are who we are as a people in SA. That's what protests are. They are who we are. Now, I understand that generally speaking, you will have a law because it does things that a constitution wouldn't be able to do. So if you're speaking about social welfare, your law will tell you the steps to take to access that social welfare, who qualifies and who doesn't, how much money is dispensed for which categories of people. I haven't been able to find a reason as to why we need a law for protest. Now, as you will see from this, most of my argument is based on the procedural aspects of these laws. Substantively, it might be fine. So, the first example. July 2014, 110 middle-aged women whose profession is to be a community healthcare worker. So essentially, they're not trained medically, but because of their experience in their communities, they assist in getting healthcare services to people in their homes. They cleanse your wounds if you have a wound. They give you your medication. They teach you about how to take your medication. Like I said, very poor, not paid. They're categorized as volunteers by the Department of Health. Or in some instances, they're hired by NGOs, paid no more than 2,000 or 2,500 rands a month. Breadwinners. July 2014, they're summarily dismissed by the Department of Health in the Free State. They stage what they call a night vigil in the offices, outside the offices of the Department of Health. Police come in, they ask for a notice, and they're like, no, there's no notice. They're taken in police vans, locked up for a number of days for attending a gathering for which no notice was given. They have to interface with a cruel and harsh justice system, or legal system. Now we know for a fact that the protest was peaceful because in court, the police officers admitted that, it was a peaceful protest. They not just arrested, but through 2 years, they have to travel to court once every 3 months. They have no jobs. The magistrate refuses to continue the trial if one of them is not around. Many postponements. Civil society comes in to assist them financially, to bring them to court every time there's a court sitting. Universities have to be asked to give them accommodation. And eventually they're convicted. 3 months imprisonment or 600 rands. And so what you find in this example is not a bad law as such. Yes, there is a bad law, but that's not the cardinal thing you can take out of this example. What you find in this example is intolerance and our inability as this nation of protest, our inability to appreciate that protest will be disruptive of our activities. What you find in here, because of that intolerance we have of protest, as much as protests are what we are, what you find in here is now the abuse of the law that exists. If you look at the US jurisprudence on protests, I'm going to read you just from a couple of cases. In one case, an ordinance which banned yelling, shouting, hooting, whistling, or singing at any time or place so as to annoy, disturb the quiet comfort or repose of any person in the vicinity. It was held to be a violation of the Constitution, that ordinance. In another case, the court struck down an ordinance banning offensive pickets, specifically holding that demonstration and pickets perceived as offensive, rude, or disruptive remain protected by the First Amendment. Now I can continue this. What we don't understand as a society in SA is that disruptive element of protest, that margin of obstruction that you will suffer because of protest and because of our lack of, or our unwillingness to take a 2-hour detour as we drive to our work because there's a protest. Then we abuse the legislative framework that's there for our own ends. So I ask again, why do we need a protest law? Now you might say, well, we need it in order to curb violence. There's more violence now that the law is there. So for instance, there was malicious damage to property. That crime exists within our laws. So you wouldn't need it in a Regulations of Gatherings Act. If protesters were assaulting people or they were being assaulted, that exists in our statute books. There is no action that protesters can engage in which doesn't already exist somewhere, if it's illegal, carrying a weapon, pointing a weapon. By having that law, you now mechanicalize, you technicalize protests. You freeze them in this paper through which all other protests will have to be looked at. Is there a marshal? Is there a convener? Has a notice been submitted? Where are you going to start your protest? Where are you going to end? Is there someone who's willing to accept your memorandum? And you take away, by doing that, you take away the natural state of protest, the human element of protest, the spontaneity, the vibrancy of protest. And that's what you do when you make them into a law. Because of all of these elements, right? Society's intolerance, the poor training of police officers. You stifle protest because every other protest must look like this. It has to be like what I have in this paper. And even if we weren't looking into the exact procedural aspect of the protest within the law itself, the mere fact that the majority of people who have to protest living in black communities, who are poor, who are in rural areas, the mere fact that they have to interface with police officers or municipal council, that alone is a gateway for abuse because of the inability to have negotiating power with that official. Now, again, I ask, why do we need to interface with such a system when we want to express ourselves, when we want to be who we are? Our Constitution in Section 7, says that the state must respect, protect, promote, and fulfill the rights in the Bill of Rights. What we need to do is to focus on the state promoting the right to protest. What we need to do as a country is to reflect and debate and discuss protest and the nature of protest, the disruptive element of protest. That's what we need. We need not just an education campaign to say this, you have a right to protest, but we need an education campaign for training of police officials. What we see from police, the heavy-handedness that we spoke about, is not something that's just in the police department. It's illustrative of what we are as a society. That intolerance I spoke about. And this is where, if our state emphasized more the obligation to promote the right to protest in education campaigns. I mean, if you want to see the success of education campaigns, the issue of HIV and AIDS is one element where we can say activists who worked on that issue succeeded in education. When we signed the Constitution into law in 1996, the education campaigns around the Constitution. So that's what we need, more than we need protest laws. I think I'll leave it there.